do you call it a disclaimer, Mason? We're going to be recording these sessions. I'm going to post them on my website. I don't know what CSAIR is going to do with them, probably have them available in some way. When you participate in these sessions, you are giving me permission to record your image and post it on my website, in addition to whatever CSAIR does with these recordings. If you do not want to be recorded and you still want to be in the class, just turn off your video and your microphone, and you can hear everything that goes on. You see everything and you'll hear everything, but we won't see you. Okay, and Mason is in charge of the tech support for this group, and it's so sophisticated, I can't tell you how much fun it is. He's going to be doing chat during this thing, and I am not going to be paying any attention to the chat. Okay, so Mason, uncenter me so that I could see everybody. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm not in gallery. How do I get to be in gallery? Gallery view. Ha! Did it. Okay, Miriam, it's good to see you. Who else haven't I?
Howard?
I've seen. Phil, it's good to see you too. Smart. Okay, so everybody, I'm going to repeat. When you speak to me, please, hi, Florence. When you speak to me, get close to the computer and or speak up, both, because this computer, the audio isn't as good as I would like. That's all. And of course, I'm not even saying that my ears are getting older, but they're getting older. It's the way it is. Does everybody have a complete Tanakh available? Hi, Vivian. Good to see you.
Yes.
Yes. Good. Okay. By complete Tanakh, I don't mean just the Chumash. Oh, and he's linking you to Safaria. Okay, good. Mason is linking everyone to Safaria. If you don't have a Tanakh, the problem with Safaria is you have to look at it on the screen unless you have a different device that you can find it on. And of course, the translation is not JPS, which is my preferred translation. So if you're going to rely on the translation, where is Michael? If you're going to rely on the translation, I'm going to say Michael's famous poster, which is all translation is an act of interpretation. And I'm going to hold you to the Hebrew text, whether you can read Hebrew or not. I can read Hebrew, so that will save us. Okay? So the only synagogue Tanakh that I do not allow in my classes, who knows?
King James Version.
No. Synagogue.
Art scroll.
Who said that?
Howard.
Michael said that. Michael gets 10 points. Michael, can you tell everybody why I don't allow it?
Because you consider that it's not really a translation, that it's in effect a theological teaching according to the belief
There is
of
sort
Art
of.
Scroll.
What it is that the Art Scroll interpolates into its translation the rabbinic interpretation without telling anybody anywhere that the rabbinic interpretation is not in the biblical text. So it looks seamless, as though the rabbis and the biblical text are one, which you know they are not, and I don't believe they are one. So because most people who take my classes can't read Hebrew fluently, it's misleading to them, and I'm tired of answering questions about why the text says such, and it's really the rabbis who say it. So no Art Scroll allowed in this class. If you're using an Art Scroll, go ahead and use it. Just don't read aloud in my class, okay? Everybody else. Okay, Erica's laughing. She thinks it's hilarious. Okay, it's not hilarious. I think it's misleading and I don't like it. Okay. So let's see. I know most of you, and I pretty much have a sense. Hi, Charles. I pretty much have a sense of what your backgrounds are. Arthur, it's good to see you. Mateo, I don't have any video for you. Could you just let me see a quick look at your face just so I know who you are? Hi, Mateo. It's good to see you. You're the person in the room. I'm delighted. Okay, if you would rather not be on video, you don't have to be. It's okay. I just wanted to see your face. It's totally okay if you want to not be visible.
Fine with me.
Okay? Okay. So I'm going to, how many of you received the syllabus in advance of today? You have to move your hand, Mason says you have to move your hand. Okay. How many of you actually looked at the biblical text for today? Either the Samson story, yeah, some of you looked at the Samson story, or number 6 on the Nazir, the Nazarite vow. Sue Ellen did. Nobody else did. Maybe Saul did a little, maybe Suzanne did a little, maybe Barry did. Ellen did not, okay. This is not a test. Okay. We're going to be starting out with the difference between vows and oaths. Vows and oaths. I know it sounds in English as though they're similar. In Hebrew, there's different language attached to each of them. And we're going to talk about that. Can I just see a movement of hands for people who can read Hebrew letters if I actually write them in capital letters on a whiteboard? 4 of you, 5 of you, 6 of you, 8 of you. Miriam, I know you can, so you don't have to raise your hand. Arthur can. Okay, so hands down. I am going to put this up in front of my face. Mason helped me figure out how to do this so that you can read it, although the light is in the way and I'm not used to doing this. Okay, so thank you, Mason. Okay, so can you all see the Nun Daled Resh in the square root, in the root symbol, and in English NDR? Can you see Nazir? In English, Nazir. Can you see Sheva in the square root symbol? Can you all see that? And I have it down as a verb to swear and as a noun, an oath. Okay. A neder is a kind of a vow. You swear an oath. And very often, not always, but very often, the word sheva is associated with covenant language. The word neder is never associated with covenant language. It's never about commitment to God. I mean, you obviously are committing to God to dedicate yourself, but it's never an official requirement, okay? Is there, everybody, if you think you're gonna need this, quick, take a screenshot of it and put it somewhere else. I'm gonna put this down, okay? Whoever needs it, I'm putting it down. If you need it again, let me know and I'll work it out with Mason how to put it somewhere where you could get it. So we're gonna be talking about the differences between vows and oaths. And we're going to mostly focus on the idea of neder or vow and nazir, which is someone who dedicates himself or herself to God in a vow. We're going to talk about that in the beginning, this very first session, because I want to talk about the Samson story in which the idea of dedication to God in the form of a Nazarite vow is central to the character of Samson, okay? As all of you know, because you've read the text, I saw your hands. So we're in Numbers 6, 1 to 27, which is Bamidbar. And you're gonna yell at me because I have the ESV translation in my book as opposed to the JPS. So see how you like it. When either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazarite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from, and then there's a list of things that this person is not allowed to participate in. The first is wine and strong drink, to such an extent that they are not allowed to touch grapes or the products of grapes. No raisins for the vow. He shall or any grapes, fresh or dried. That includes raisins. All the days of his separation, he will eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the or the skins. No razor shall touch his head until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. I love the translation here, he separates, because that is the essence of when you dedicate yourself, when you are kadosh, when you are separating yourself. That is the essence of the word in Hebrew. So I love that they use that translation here. Until the time is completed for which he separates himself to God, he shall be holy. He shall let the locks of his hair and head grow long. And let's see. So before I even get to the Nazirite vow, which is today, I want to say that there are lots of different vows in the Bible, that the repayment of vows is a big deal. I found 50 to 100 places. I stopped counting after a while. In Psalms and in the Chumash and in the rest of the Bible, in which the obligation to pay a vow, the failure to pay a vow that you promised, the necessity of keeping your word, paying a vow, using the language of nazir, of neder. If you make a neder, make a vow, occurs between 50 and 100 times just in my quick survey. So apparently Israelites were very, very good at saying, I swear I'll do this. And then of course they had to do it, because you don't take the name of God in vain. And what they would do, mostly the consequences of the vow, would be, I promise I'll bring a goat or a kid or a bull or an ox or a cow and give it to the sanctuary, the priesthood, the temple. That was the consequences of the vow. You would say, I'm going to hit a no-hitter on this game, or, and if I do it, I'll bring an offering to God. And that's what I'm conflating baseball with the Bible. You all know, but baseball did not exist in the time of the Bible, right? No one's laughing. Ed is smiling. Thank you, Ed. Sue Ellen is smiling. Good. Okay. Erica's smiling. Excellent. Okay. Someone got the joke. That's all I care about. There is an expectation that if you make any kind of a vow or oath to God, that you will fulfill it. Period. No discussion. But the fact that this was not done a lot of the time is attested to by the fact that there are a lot of exhortations to fulfill your vows, which would not be necessary if everyone were doing it. So there is a lot of vow making in the Bible, and we can assume that there is some welching on the vow, because otherwise they wouldn't be telling us to fulfill our vows and keep our words. All of this is necessary to begin with, because I want you to understand that making a vow is normative in the time of the Bible. It is not weird, unusual, special. What is frowned upon over and over again in the Bible is making a stupid vow, a rash vow, a vow you didn't think about, a vow you didn't consider the language of, a vow that is so open-ended that if anything happens, you're on the line for it. That is what is frowned upon. Actually, signing the covenant with God is making a vow. You are promising to keep the covenant with God. Covenants really are the basis of the relationship between God and Israel. So it is stupid vows, unthought about vows, careless vows that are frowned upon in the Tanakh. And that is all I am going to say about vows. If anyone has anything else they want to know, I will go back to my notes. Right? We're all there. Are there any questions so far at this point? And this includes something I didn't mention that you may want to talk about based on your reading. Ed, go ahead, but you have to speak loud.
You mentioned that vows are made. I'm assuming they're voluntary, having to do with the covenant. But when a boy is circumcised, the male child goes through the Brit ceremony. Is that a vow? Is he already obligated to be part of the covenant and observe the rules, et cetera, et cetera?
That's an excellent question, Ed. Slightly off topic, but it's an excellent question. The circumcision, the act of circumcision, is not in itself a pledge, a vow, an oath. The act of circumcision, very clearly in chapter 17 of the book of Genesis, is a sign of the covenant, a sign that that baby belongs to the covenant. And it only belongs to boy babies for obvious reasons. Girl babies do not have that sign, okay? If a particular baby boy is not circumcised, the covenant between God and Israel is unaffected. The covenant between God and Israel stands if you do not circumcise your baby boy. It is that baby boy who is not participating in the covenant. He doesn't have the sign of the covenant cut into his body. And that's all I'm going to say about that, Ed, because it's not the topic, okay?
Thank you. You answered the question.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? I want to talk about the Samson story, and then if we have time at the end, I'll go back to looking at who may make a vow. Any other questions? Really? Really? No other questions? Okay, excellent. So now we are going to look at the Samson story. I am going to tell you where the verses are that I am looking at. You are free to look at the Tanakh or not. I will read the text. I want to make it clear what's going on with Samson and the Nazirite vow. Okay, Samson says everyone can share your questions on the chat. Isn't that distracting, Mason? Or will you look at it later and tell me about it? I can't hear you, Mason. You're muted.
I'm happy.
Okay, you'll keep up with the chat. Okay, thank you,
Anything
Mason.
comes in
Okay.
that you need to know about, I'll be sure to let you know.
Okay, the only thing I would like you to interrupt me with while I'm speaking, and do that by going like this so I can see you and I'll call on you, is I call a point of information. That is, if I say something and you don't understand the word, I say something and you don't know where I got it from, something where in order to keep up with the rest of the discussion, you need to clarify. Do you understand? I'm happy to take those questions. Comments, observations, all of that, there will be time for that, but not while I'm explicating what I'm talking about. Is that clear? Everyone good with that? Okay, Charles, are you saying yes, or are you asking to say something?
I'm saying yes to you, but I have a question. Where exactly are you reading from? It says Judges 13 to 16. I mean, chapter 13 to 16?
The truth is, Charles, I haven't begun to read yet. And
No,
when I
I
begin to
understand.
read, I will tell you where I am.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, okay, because I was
It
trying
will
to
be
turn
between
to it.
Judges 13 and 16, I promise you. But I haven't started
But
yet.
you're talking chapters 13 and 16.
I'm talking chapters 13 to 16. Does anyone know why? Because that's the story of Samson.
Okay.
And pretty much the issue of his Nazirite commitment flows through his entire story. So I'm picking out specific episodes from those chapters, and I will tell you when I read them where I am. Okay? Okay, good. Any other questions? And that was an excellent point of information, Charles. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay. So I'm going to give credit here to my teacher, Ed Greenstein. How many of you know who he is? I've talked about him in the past. He is now an emeritus professor at Bar-Ilan University. He recently retired, which is terrifying because he's younger than I am. And he won a major Israel Prize that is sort of like the Israel Nobel Prize for Bible study. And I'm very, very proud to associate with him. He was the second reader on my dissertation and a very good friend. He wrote a wonderful article about Samson many years ago. And I am going to be building on this article in my interpretation of the story. And I'm going to give you the quick version now, and then I'll be making the case for it from time to time as we go through the text. But really, I'm concentrating on the Nazirite nature of the vow, okay? So the thesis of Ed Greenstein's article is that Samson is the only judge who operates alone, who doesn't seem to lead in any meaningful way. He basically operates autonomously and a lot of the time on impulse. A lot of what he does cannot be justified by any rational basis. And Ed has a fabulous reading for this, which is that Samson does not only stand for himself as a leader of Israel, but he is himself a paradigm for the nation of Israel. He stands for the nation of Israel as a whole. He had a vow thrust upon him when he was born that, as someone pointed out, he did not choose. Who was it who asked me about, Ed, I think you asked me about a voluntary commitment and a commitment thrust upon you. It's not for a specified period the way the Nazirite vow is. Usually the Nazirite vow is 7 years. Oh, that's the article, The Riddle of Samson. Thank you, Mason. I love having Mason doing this. It must last the entire length of Samson's life, not for a specific period. And if you read the Samson story, and we're going to read the section in a second, the Nazirite vow doesn't, we just read it, right? You're not allowed to have any strong drink, and you're not allowed to cut your hair. And does it say anything about unclean food? Did we just read anything about unclean food? Everyone go like this. No, we didn't read anything about unclean food, because unclean food is something that is enjoined upon all of Israel all the time. This is not something that's associated with the Nazirite vow, okay? Ed says that the Nazirite vow and the extra restrictions, like not eating anything unclean, relate to the covenant at Sinai, the commitment to the covenant at Sinai. The people who were escapees, exiled, from Egyptian slavery, those people chose to stand at the foot of Sinai. Everybody descended from them had this vow thrust upon us, right? This covenant with God, we're born into it, or we choose it. But in any case, this is something that's for our lifetime and not for a finite amount of time. And he says that both of these represent ways that Samson stands for the nation of Israel as a whole. And of course, Ed makes a whole beautiful argument about a lot of Samson's irrational choices, which mirror Israel's irrational choices over the course of Israel's history. So I am now chapter 13, 3-5, and verse 14. Charles, are you with me? I can only see the top of your head. Yes? Excellent. An angel of God appeared to the woman. The woman is Manoah's wife. She is anonymous, as many women are in the Bible. I don't have to tell you, feminist scholars have a field day with how many women are anonymous. But Manoah himself is just about anonymous, because all we know is his first name. We don't know his father's name or anything except what tribe he belongs to. He is a Danite, and Samson is from the tribe of Dan. So when you have an anonymous character in the Bible, it represents something bigger than itself. Does anybody remember what it is when you have an anonymous character? This is why we have final exams and papers. But you know what? It's job security for me, so I'm happy to repeat it. The reason, Sue Ellen is laughing, but it's true. The reason that we have anonymous characters is that they are archetypes. Where's Barry? Barry, archetype. This should be your word, your language. Do I have any other therapists in the room? Barry is it. Okay, so you have archetypes. Manoah's wife is the archetype of a mother who was coming to God for something about her baby. Manoah's wife. Samson is an archetype. Manoah is an archetype, and he is also a buffoon, which makes him hilarious. But that's another story and a different course, not being taught here. But an angel of God appeared to the woman. The woman is Samson's mother, Manoah. She is not yet pregnant, and said to her, "You are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son." The interesting thing about Manoah's wife is that we have no record whatsoever that she has ever asked for a son, prayed for a son, asked to have her barrenness changed or taken from her. Some of you who are familiar with Jacob and Rachel know that at one point Rachel says, "Remove this barrenness from me or I am as one dead." And Jacob very kindly and compassionately turns to her and says, "Who do you think I am, God?" Just saying. So women historically complain about barrenness. We have no evidence that she has. Welcome, Deb. I can't see your face, but I'm glad that you're here. He goes on. I'm now in verse 4 of chapter 13. Charles, you with me? Nod your head. Good. "Now be careful not to drink wine or other intoxicant," which we know is from the Nazarite restrictions in Numbers 6. You all remember that? We just read it, right? "Or to eat anything unclean." Why is he bringing that up here when all of Israel is not allowed to eat anything unclean? He also doesn't define what is unclean, but we're not even going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. And again, this is what Ed Greenstein uses as some of the evidence to indicate that Samson is also an archetype, that he stands for all of Israel and not just for himself, okay? "For you are going to conceive and bear a son. Let no razor touch his head," which is part of the Nazarite restrictions. "For the boy is to be a Nazarite to God from the womb on. He shall be the first to deliver Israel from the Philistines," which also can be read as he will begin to free Israel from the Philistines. I'm not going to go into the philology. It's often translated in what I consider an incorrect manner by JPS. But he's beginning the fight against the Philistines. Who knows when it ended? Who knows when the fight against the Philistines ended? Anybody? I'll take if you mention which king it ended under. I'll take anything. Irene, unmute yourself if you want to answer that. I can't see your face. No, nobody. Okay. King David, at the end of King David's reign, we don't hear anything more about the Philistines. Or if we do, they're our buddies and they're kind of embedded in our tribes. So Samson is the beginning, and the end of David's reign is the end of the Philistine menace to Israel. Now I'm in verse 14 of the same chapter. He's repeating to Manoah what he said to Manoah's wife. "She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, or drink wine or other intoxicant, or eat anything unclean. She must observe all that I commanded her." Okay, which includes the cutting of the hair. Okay, are you all with me? The baby is born and he grows up. And sure enough, by the end of chapter 13, the Spirit of God comes upon him in the middle of nowhere on the road between two cities in the tribe of Dan, in the territory of the tribe of Dan. The Spirit of God falls upon him. Phil is checking up on me to make sure I'm right? Is it in the text, Phil? Did you find it? Did you see it? Where the Spirit of God comes on Samson? You were looking at it. No, I shouldn't count on you to, I need somebody. Ellen found it. Okay. Somebody has to keep me honest. You're keeping me honest.
Ruach Adonai lepa'amo. Ruach Adonai.
Thank you, Arthur. The Spirit of God fell upon him, and it's between Zorah and Eshtaol. Eshtaol, is that right? Those are the two places. Those are two places in the tribe of Dan. Okay, so how many of you, again, let me just see you moving your hands, actually read the story of Samson in any language with any translation, including Art Scroll, before the class? Anybody remember the story of Samson? Oh boy, we're going to have to repeat the story. Okay. All right. I'm going to just open it up. So that basically was chapter 13. Samson's birth is predicted by the angel. An angel comes to the wife of Manoah. Manoah gets really pissed and says, why did he come to you? Why didn't he come to me? So the angel comes back to the wife, and the wife says, wait here. And she goes and gets her husband, and he repeats it to her husband. This is all a kind of buffoonery that is to get people engaged with the story. Samson himself is a little bit of a buffoon, but the underlying subtext, the message of these chapters is quite serious. So I am now, we have finished chapter 13, as Arthur pointed out to us. The Spirit of God came to Samson when he was in the territory of the tribe of Dan, between two cities. And I am now in chapter 14.
I'm sorry.
I am going to summarize this because I really want to talk about vows at the end if we have time. And I really want you to focus on the Nazirite portion of the program and not worry so much about Samson's adventures, which maybe after you hear our conversation today, you're going to want to go back and read on your own. That's Vivian and Charles. I see you. It's so good to see you. Okay. So you all know that this class is an hour and a quarter, right? Usually they're an hour, and you can leave whenever you need to, but it's nice to know that I have the time. So I'm now at the beginning of 14. Samson, after the Spirit of God comes upon him, and I want to talk a little bit about the Spirit of God. Has anybody here had the Spirit of God fall upon you? You don't have to tell me about it if you don't want to. Anybody? When the Spirit of God falls upon you, this is from my text study and not from my personal experience, it ramps you up and energizes you for a period, and then it leaves you and you're tremendously let down. And one of the side effects or after effects of the Spirit of God leaving someone seems to be this tremendous sense of insecurity, this tremendous terror almost. Hi, Deb, good to see your face. This tremendous anxiety that whatever it is you just did, committed to, tried to do, attempted, while the Spirit of God was upon you, you will not be able to finish now that the Spirit of God has departed. This happens over and over again. It happens multiple times in the story of Samson. It happens in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about Yiftach's vow, Jephthah's vow. It happens to Jephthah. If anybody, and I know nobody here because you're all of the age where the 60s was really important to you, nobody here has had any experience with life-altering drugs on this broadcast here. But if you've ever experienced the rush of a particular kind of a drug and then the letdown afterwards, that may be a little bit of what it could be like based on the description in the biblical text. But there is definitely a change when the Spirit of God comes upon someone, and there is definitely a letdown when it goes. And that becomes very important in the story of Samson, which is why I'm talking about it now. So the Spirit of God comes upon Samson sometime when he's an older guy, a young man, no longer a newborn. And then we move to chapter 14. Samson is, okay, so the tribe of Dan at this point is near the seashore, the Mediterranean coast. Do you all have a map in your head of this? Because I did not bring a map. Mason! I did not bring a map, but it's along the coast. Later, Dan will migrate to the north of Israel in a different story, also in Judges that we will not talk about today. But right now, they're located on the coast. And no, it's okay. When the coast is occupied by the Philistines, and you are the Israelite tribe of Dan, you do not have a lot of power. Your employment depends on the Philistines hiring you to do menial work for them as they ply their ships up and down the coast. You see what I'm saying? So the tribe of Dan is feeling a lot of pressure from the Philistines. They're in the position of menial servants to the Philistines, but they live on the coast. Okay, Wikimedia. It's an Israel map if you want to look at it, if you don't believe me. But the tribe of Dan at this point is along the coast, and they are being pressured by the Philistines. One of the reasons, I think, for the migration in chapter 17 and chapter 18 of the book of Judges. So the tribe of Dan has a lot of interaction with the Philistines. And here Samson goes down to one of the cities of the Philistines where he spots a Philistine woman who catches his eye, and he wants her for his wife. This is a problem on many levels. Number one, the Philistines view themselves as superior to the Israelites. Probably Philistines view themselves as superior to Samson on many levels. Unfortunately, I like to say he inherited his father's brains instead of his mother's brains. His father is not a smart guy, which if you read chapter 13, some of the comedy comes from his being not a smart guy. But his mother is very smart, and he got his father's brains instead of his mother's brains. So number one, the Philistines probably did not respect Samson on that level. And number two, Samson is very, very strong. He's powerful. So he kind of has that quality that we stereotype, which is more brawn than brains, right? In the West, we stereotype this, and in Samson, that's made into a comic figure. Anyway, he sees a girl, and he decides that he wants to marry her. This woman is nameless, which makes her an archetype. She is an archetype for every shiksa any Jewish boy ever wanted to marry. Okay, no, that's not, no. In the Bible, she is an archetype for the foreign woman, the seductive foreign woman. And she winds up betraying Samson, one of several women who betray Samson. And that is the object lesson of the foreign woman, the way that she is an archetype. Okay, are you with me on this? I'm assuming you know the story of Samson at least somewhat, because I am not going to spend a lot of time telling the story, although I may have no choice. I'm looking at your faces and I may not have a choice. Okay, we'll see. The woman, he noticed a young woman, and he goes home to his parents and he says, I want her, get her for me. Because in those days, the negotiation was done between families, and the father did the securing of the bride for the son. Both of his parents say, couldn't you find a nice Jewish girl? Couldn't you find someone from your own people? And one of the other things that you should know is it's written here. Couldn't you find anyone from our own kinsmen that you had to go and find someone from the uncircumcised Philistines? The Philistines are the only people in the Bible, and I apologize to those of you who have studied with me in the past because I've said this before, but review obviously is not a bad thing. There are no exams or papers in this course. So the Philistines are the only population that did not practice any form of circumcision. All of the Semitic tribes performed a circumcision around the foreskin. The difference was at different ages. In Israel, it was at a week after birth, and in other cultures that were Semitic cultures, it was at puberty. The Egyptians practiced a transverse form of circumcision, which I guess would not be a circumcision, it would be a transition. Do I have any medical doctors? I don't know what you call it. Anyway, but they clearly manipulate the foreskin. And one of the reasons that the Pharaoh's daughter probably recognizes Moses right away as soon as she takes the baby out of the basket is that his penis looked different from an Egyptian penis, and she knew immediately that it was an Israelite baby. But the only people that doesn't mess around with the male organ at any age in the Levantine area is the Philistines, because they come from the there's no Roman world yet, but from the Greek world where you don't mess with the body. The body itself is perfection. Howard, you have a question? Irene, you have a question? I see a hand moving. Yes? You have to unmute yourself and you have to speak up because I can't hear you.
By the way, is Mason muting us?
No, you have to move closer to the microphone in the computer.
The point is that the Philistines were Johnny's coming lately. They made anti-day come after the tribe of Dan was there, which is why Dan had the area, because they come from Mycenae and Knossos when those Greek cities are destroyed. And in fact,
the Philistines come, excuse me, the Philistines come around 1200 BC, and the Joshua conquest, which didn't really happen, but is set in the period of 1300 BCE. So it's basically everything happens. 1200 BCE is the cutoff. There apparently was some major climate event that caused a lot of migration. And the Philistines and the Joshua setting are about the same time, coterminous, but the Philistines had something that the Hebrews did not have. Can you tell me what that is?
writing,
Howard?
writing.
No. No, we know from Gideon that people could write things down in the Bible. No.
The
What?
ships.
Iron.
Who said iron? Who said iron?
I did.
Barry, you get 20 points. 20 points. Iron Age technology has been going on. No, you're muted. I can't hear you, Miriam. You have to unmute yourself if you want to say anything. You press the space bar and hold it down. Hold down the space bar. There you go. Now I can hear you. Okay. No, but you have to hold it down.
They had chariots. That's what enabled them to be such conquering
Okay.
heroes.
Right.
Who else had chariots?
Which
The
means that they
Egyptians
knew how
had
to spell.
chariots. Everyone had chariots. And the reason that they are called iron chariots is not because they were made of iron, but because they had iron wheels. Iron Age technology is very early, but it is not evenly distributed in the ancient world. So some groups have it and some groups do not. The Egyptians have it, the Philistines have it, the Hebrews do
The
not have
Hittites
it.
have it.
The Hittites have it because they come from the same makor, the same root as the Philistines. They come from the Greco, what do you call it?
Archaic Greece.
I am going to say this. When David captures chariots and horses, he hobbles the horses because he doesn't know what to do with them. When his son Solomon sets up to be king, he has stables of horses and chariots. In that short period between the father and the son, the Israelites acquire Iron Age technology. Do you understand what a shift that is and how long Israel went? They had to have their plowshares sharpened by their Philistine enemies because the Philistines wanted to make sure they weren't going to turn them into weapons. Okay? This is a very difficult way for them to live, but the Iron Age technology is unevenly distributed. Israel is the last group to get in the biblical. Okay, so I'm still at the beginning of 14. So we talked about why the Philistines are called the uncircumcised. The ones with foreskins is really what they're called, which is hilarious. But you have to know Hebrew to see how funny that is. Anyway, he says, get her for me. She's the one I want. And his father and mother, I'm reading from verse 4 in chapter 14. His father and his mother did not know that this was God's doing because God was seeking a pretext against the Philistines. Okay? For my other group, we were talking about how there's no chance and no fortune in the Bible. Everything is at God's hands. Even this young boy wanting to marry a non-Israelite is part of God's plan to get at the Philistines. Just saying. Okay. So Samson and both his parents go down to Timnah. Ordinarily, the mother would not have to accompany the father. The father would go by himself. But again, the mother is no dummy, and she knows that the father is, and she's going along with him for the negotiation. Are you clear on why we have both parents there? It's hilarious. If you were part of the culture, you would be laughing at that, but you are not laughing, so I didn't do a good job. Okay. I am now on I'm in the middle of verse 5. There's a paragraph in the JPS. Do you see it? When he came to the vineyards of Timnah, right? They're walking from a city in Dan, to the town of Timnah, which is a Philistine town. They're very close together, relatively close together, because Dan and the Philistines are cheek by jowl. Okay, they're passing vineyards. Vineyards happen in the space between towns that you have your fields sown, your orchard sown, your, what do they call olive groves? Olive groves, that's where you have all of the agriculture, is in the fields between towns. They're passing by a vineyard. Now, we have just read multiple times the prohibition that Samson must observe about from being a Nazirite from his birth, and he must be a Nazirite for his entire life. And what is the most repeated restriction?
Liquor.
You have to unmute yourself. If you want to unmute yourself for a second, just press down the space bar and hold it.
No alcohol.
Not only no alcohol, no contact with anything relating to grapes, no raisins, no seeds, no leaves, no skins, no vinegar, no grape juice. And what does he do? Walking outside a vineyard, and he goes into the vineyard. Why? Who knows? And in the vineyard, he encounters, the text here says a full-grown lion. In Hebrew, it's a young lion. It's a lion cub. But I'm not going to even start with my attitude about JPS. If I tell you it's the best of the translations and I have multiple issues with it, you'll understand what a cranky person I am. So he enters the vineyard, which he should not be doing. He grabs the lion. Everybody, the lion is an unclean animal. He rips the lion to shreds. He should not be touching a carcass. The way a person might tear a kid asunder. I don't know. Is a kid easy to tear apart? I don't think I would have an easy time tearing a baby goat apart, but maybe it's easy. But he didn't tell his mother or his father what he did. Do you know why? Because he's not supposed to be in the grape vine, what do you call it?
Vineyard.
Vineyard, right. He's not supposed to be in the vineyard, and if he told his parents, they would know. Miriam.
Okay, so he's going with his parents to the negotiations for the wife. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Traveling down with them.
Are you asking me a point of information question, Miriam?
Where are the parents when he is in the vineyard handling this lion or lion cub? Did they go on ahead? Did they not notice that he wasn't with them?
I think he went ahead. He's a young man and they're older people. And it doesn't matter. What is the famous rabbinic saying? We don't ask questions about a story. If it doesn't say, it's not important. His parents didn't know that he was in the vineyard. And what else does it say about tearing the kid apart, right? Diane just said she would have trouble doing it. What does it say? The Spirit of God came upon him and he tore the kid asunder, right? So already we know from the narrator that Samson's wanting this Timnite bride is an act of God to seek a pretext against the Philistines. And now he's in this vineyard breaking, the first time we read about it, but breaking his Nazirite commitment, and the Spirit of God comes upon him. So this may also be something that God is engineering. And as we see later on, quite possibly it is, right? He didn't tell his parents what he did. And they go down, they speak to the woman. She pleased Samson. Samson's the only one that is pleased by this match. I guarantee you that Timnite's father is not happy. The Philistines are not happy. And Samson's parents are not happy. Nobody's happy but Samson. He comes back the following year to marry her. Are his parents with him? We know that someone's with him because he's sharing the honey from carcass, right? He comes upon the carcass of the lion, the young lion. And what's inside the carcass of the young lion? A beehive. There's been honey. Now, the lion is unclean. The honey is unclean because it comes from the carcass of a lion. What has he been told? No unclean food. Even though all Israelites are bound by the same restriction, he's particularly told that. And he's not supposed to scoop honey from the carcass of a lion. Any carcass is unclean. Carcass of an unclean animal you don't eat from. Period. No discussion, right? Okay. How many times are we breaking the Nazirite restriction that he's given by the angel at the beginning? How many times is this so far? And we're only in chapter 14. He rejoined his father and mother. They're used to him walking off on the side. They're having all they can do to get from one town to the other, and he's kind of wandering off.
But this is a year later.
He shares the honey with them, but he doesn't tell them where he got it from. The good news about this means nobody knows when he turns it into a riddle, no one knows the answer but him. He's the only one who knows the answer. Okay? His father came down to the woman, and his mother clearly wanted no part of it. She's not even mentioned here. And Samson makes a feast. Okay, who can look at the Hebrew? Arthur, where are you? Arthur, I want you to look at the Hebrew in verse 10 for feast, because it is not a feast. What is it? Vayas Sam Shimshon what? Arthur, you have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute.
Mishteh.
A mishteh. Mishteh. Mishteh comes from the root shata, to drink. And it doesn't mean to drink water. It means to drink, right? A mishteh is a drinking party. He makes a cocktail party. Okay, what's wrong with this picture?
He's
Liquor.
Right. A feast would be fine. Wine and strong drink are not okay. So already we have a mishteh. I'm counting. I'm up to 3. Are there more? There may be more. Arthur, what? You have to unmute yourself.
I have a question. At this,
Is it a point of information?
maybe, does Samson actually know that he is a Nazir at this point in his life?
Guarantee his parents have talked about nothing else all his life. Just saying. Guaranteed.
Why is he so ill-informed about the rituals then?
You're asking a question about a story,
He's not
number one.
ill-informed.
Number 2, what did the narrator just tell us in chapter 14? What did we just hear? This was God's way of seeking a pretext against the Philistines. Samson, before he's conceived, the prophecy is that he will be at the beginning of fighting the Philistines. You can't get a clearer picture than that. It's explicit. Why? That's why. He's behaving in an aberrant manner because God has a plan. Israel often behaves in an aberrant manner. God could punish Israel, and that's part of God's plan. Don't ask me why. God and I haven't spoken in a long time. Okay. They're at this drinking party, which is already a problem, I think, presumably. He proposes a riddle. Now, this proposal of a riddle is a very interesting trope, very interesting narrative element, because in Greek wedding accounts, the riddling portion of the program is a big deal. It's apparently one of the wedding entertainments in Greek weddings. And the Philistines come from the Greek world. So is this his idea, or did someone put him up to it? Do you see what I'm saying? This is not an Israelite thing. it's maybe a Philistine thing. Do you see what I'm saying here? I'm bringing in a little bit of academic anthropology to the reading of this text. Propounding a riddle, anyway, I didn't say, because you could read it yourself, that the Timnite bride assigns 30 companions to Samson. Often this is understood as poor Samson have any on him. Let's give him from local companions. But in fact, the language, which I'm not going to go into here in the Hebrew, could be interpreted as they were afraid of Samson when they saw him. He's a big brute of a guy, and when they saw him, they were afraid. They assigned the 30 companions as a kind of buffer. And in fact, they are troublemakers. They cause trouble for Samson. They're not loyal to him, they're loyal to themselves. And they are Philistines, so guess what? Anyway, Samson proposes a riddle, and it's a very expensive bet. 30 changes of clothing and 30 linen tunics. I actually once looked up this. This is hundreds of dollars worth of goods in the world he's in. This is very expensive. They take him up on it, and they expect to win. And then he propounds the riddle, and the riddle is, out of the eater, I'm in verse 14, 15. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. The only thing that fits this is his private experience finding the honey in the lion, which if no one knew that he killed the lion and no one knew that he went back and found honey in the lion, no one's going to be able to guess this riddle. So you could argue that it may not have been a fair riddle, but I don't know what the rules were in those days. They had a week to answer the riddle because the wedding celebration is about a week long. And it says for 3 days they couldn't answer the riddle. And then on the 7th day, they said to Samson, and this is a textual error, because if they couldn't guess it for 3 days, the 7th day is when they needed the answer. And the Timnite woman, nagged Samson to give her the answer for another 3 days. So there is a textual problem here. The rabbis have a nice little solution for it that they make up. It's fine. It's a textual error. It was 7 days for the whole party. First 3 days, they can't guess it. They start to get nervous. They start to put pressure on the Timnite bride. And they say to her, if you don't wheedle out of Samson the answer to this problem, we are going to burn your house down with fire. And in fact, she does. She nags him to death. She cries, you don't love me. There's no sexual play here whatsoever. This is all pure nagging. So some things are archetypes for the Philistines and for the Israelites. Okay, she harassed him with tears. You really hate me. You don't love me. I haven't even told my father and mother. Why should I tell you, he says. All right, I'm still in 14, around 17. She continues to nag him and cry. And finally, he explains it to her, and she explains it to her countrymen. So is it that her loyalty is to the Philistines, or that they got to her first with a threat? The irony, which we are not going to discuss in this class, is that in the following chapter, they make good on that threat, and they burn down her father's house. But not for this reason. It's just ironic that she did her best to avoid it, and they do it anyway, which tells you theologically that the enemy is not to be trusted even when you think you have their word. That's a theological piece. And they answer Samson, what's sweeter than honey? What's stronger than a lion? And he responds, I'm in verse 18, had you not plowed with my heifer, you would not have guessed my riddle. This is very rude to his wife. But since his wife was the one who betrayed him, you can understand he's being rude. Plowed with my heifer is not only calling his wife a cow. The plowing is sexual in its allusion. And it's basically a very rude thing to say on Samson's part. And then again, the Spirit of God grips him, right? It gripped him between Zorach and Eshtaol. It gripped him when he was tearing apart the kid. And now it's the lion like a kid. And now it's gripping him now. And what does he do with the Spirit of God? He goes down to Ashkelon. And where does he get the 30 garments? He kills 30 rich people and takes their clothing. That's how he gets it. He strips them and gives the sets of clothing to those who answered the riddle, and he leaves in a rage. So number one, you don't know if his clothing was full of blood from the lion initially. His parents don't ask any questions. Number two, the clothing that he rips off the people that he killed might have been dripping with blood, and he throws it in the faces of the Philistines and says, there's your bet. How do you like it? We don't know. That stuff is byplay, and it's not reported because it's not germane to the story. But if you're reading it as a linear left out, you can imagine some of the visual enhancements that if you were making a movie, you might want to include. He then storms off to his father's house. So in essence, he's abandoning his bride. The question is, since this happened on the 7th day of the wedding celebration, is the marriage actually concluded or is it open-ended? In other words, did the father have the right to give her to someone else? Or was she not actually married to Samson? Or does Samson's action of leaving before the consummation of the 7th night, assuming he could consummate it all through the whole week, which is certainly what Jacob does with Leah, we have no idea whether the father had the right to give the Timnite woman to one of the wedding companions, troublemakers all for all reasons. But it's as though Samson had fulfilled God's intention to cause trouble for the Philistines by choosing this woman to marry. And it wasn't necessary for him to actually marry her and build a life. It was enough that he caused trouble and death for the Philistines. Do you see what's going on here in terms of the theology? Anybody? Yeah, I got a nod from Arthur. I'll take it. Okay, so then she's given in marriage to one of the wedding companions. Okay, so that's 14. And now we are going to skip to 16. And I'm going to talk about the Samson and Delilah story. And I'm not going to talk about the interaction. Hold on a second.
Sharon. You're skipping.
Okay.
Sharon.
Yeah, Arthur.
You're
What?
skipping ahead, but just in the first sentence of 15, it says, blah, 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 he visited his wife. So does that imply that she was still married to him? Or is this
He considered her his wife. He considered her his wife. I am not teaching the story of Samson. We're focusing on vows and on the Nazirite vow in the story of Samson. I would be delighted to talk to you privately, Arthur, about the story of Samson. If you all live ad mei stream until 120, you may live to see my commentary for Judges actually published, in which case it will all be there. I am not answering that right now because it is 5 after 12 and I have to finish at 1/4 and it's just going to be hard to do that. Okay? But it's an excellent question and I'm glad you're reading it. We are going to go to the part of the story where Delilah is paid a lot of money by the Philistines, 1,100 pieces of silver by each, what, 1,700 pieces? What is it? What do they say?
1,100. 1,100, Diane.
1,100, and there are how many lords of the Philistines? 10 or 11 of them. It's a lot of money. And she has no qualms. We don't know whether Delilah is Philistine or Israelite. Erica, do you have a question? Because you're muted and I can't call on you. Is your hand up for that? Okay. So Delilah tries to get the secret of his the secret of his strength from him, the same way that the Timnite bride tried to get the secret of the riddle from Samson. And that's why I spent so much time on, we already got the point that it was a drinking party, which he should not have had. So here, we have the same situation, information from Samson that they need to have or that they want to have, that would be worth a lot to them. And in both cases, the woman is using nagging. The difference here is if you read the text, which we don't have time to do, Samson is interpreting everything she says to him as sex play. He says, if you tie me up with fresh ropes, if you tie me with sinews, he's interpreting it as part of kinky sex. And she does it because she thinks he's telling her the truth. And then she says, the Philistines are upon you. He thinks it's an arousal game, and he breaks free. And she goes, you lied to me. Because she's interested in the source of his strength, and he's interested in the hanky-panky. That's what this interplay is all about, okay? So 3 times. Number 1, he says, tie me up with new ropes. New ropes are stronger than old ropes because they're not dried out, because they're made from vegetable matter, from hemp. Tie me with sinews, moist sinews, because moist sinews are stronger than dried out sinews, which you can break. But you use the word moist, and it's going to be sexual. And he thinks he's having a sexual interaction with Delilah, and she's just interested in finding out the source of his strength. He then says, if you weave my hair into a web, and I can go into gory detail about why this web is sexual, why hair is sexual, but I don't have to, because Mika Baal has published articles about this. And you can read those articles. And Mason, you don't have to find them. It's okay. If you're motivated enough, email me and I'll tell you. So basically, Samson is operating on one level of transaction, which is a sexual byplay with this woman. And she's operating on another one, which is a financial transaction. She got money from the Philistines, and she is going to earn that money, and he is making it hard for her. And she only wants the answer to that question. Are you all clear on that interaction? How many times up to now have we got a report of Samson violating the Nazirite restrictions given to him, his mother, by the angel before he was conceived?
100.
How many? This is the 5th one. 4 up to now. 4 up to now. The first one was
Vineyard.
the vineyard. Second one was honey from the lion. The third one was, again, the mishteh, the drinking party. Marrying a Philistine woman is not a violation of the Nazirite vow. It's a violation of being an Israelite. The same way eating unclean. But it was given to Samson as a specific Nazirite rule, even though it's not listed that way in number 6. Are you all clear? Okay, I'm going to take a sip of this. So the honey, the drinking party, and now we're up to the one thing he has never violated, which is his pandemic hair. His pandemic hair, all of us with our long hair. So she says to him, how can you say you love me when you don't confide in me? You've deceived me all these times. And finally, I'm in verse 16. After she had nagged him and pressed him constantly, he was wearied to death, and he confided everything to her. He said, no razor has ever touched my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God since I was in my mother's womb. If my hair were cut, my strength would leave me, and I would become weak as an ordinary man. How many people, and I want to see moving hands, how many people think that Samson's strength is in his hair, as he reports, because of his Nazirite vow? I want hands. Saul, Arthur, most of you have had me before as a teacher. You're just not taking a chance. Sitting on the fence doesn't count. Saul and Arthur get points for taking a risk. Ellen and Barry, who else think his strength is in his hair? He believes his strength is in his hair. Erica does not. Miriam does. Miriam does not. Vivian does. Ed does not. Charles does not, because he's taken classes with me before. Diane does not. Michael does. Michael, my heart breaks. Okay. All right, I'm going to call it half and half, hands down. Stella, if you have a question, I'm not going to answer it because I'm going to wait until the class is over, and then if people have to leave, I can still talk to you, okay? So, he has had the new ropes, the moist sinews, the woven web against the wall, and now the cutting his hair. He has violated the Nazirite vow already 3 times that we know about, and his strength has not left him. The odds that leaving his hair is his strength. How do I know this? Because she cuts his hair, and he wakes up thinking he would shake himself free as he had the other times. But he did not know that God had left him. What does that mean? If you were telling someone the truth, swearing that you were telling them the truth about the source of your strength, and the source of your strength was not that you were dedicated to God, which you had clearly violated and still maintained your strength, but that God was with you, that the Spirit of God fell upon you periodically, but that God was the source of your strength, and you did not give that credit to God, God might just say, I am going to take revenge on you for this, or I'll pay you back for this, or this is going to play into my plan to kill even more Philistines than you've killed already, because I've left out all of the battles that he fought killing Philistines, right? God is saying, you think it's in your hair because you didn't break the Nazirite vow. You broke the Nazirite vow 1,000,000 times and I was still with you. I'm going to show you. And he wakes up and he thinks he's going to be strong because he doesn't expect that cutting his hair is going to affect his gift. He doesn't believe it. He thinks it's going to be the same thing as the drinking and the lion and everything else. But it's not, because he didn't give God credit. How do I know this? Because the Philistines come, they take him, they blind him, they put him where he's grinding mill in the grind house. And I am now in verse 22 of chapter 16. Are you all there? After his hair was cut off, it began to grow back. This makes everybody think that this is where his strength came back from. But if his strength had come back when his hair grew back, he wouldn't need a young lad to take him into the temple and put his hands where he tells him to. He wouldn't need any of this. Blind or not blind, he would have found a way to break loose if he had his strength back. His hair growing back is a misdirection, the same way it has been for Delilah and the same way it was for Samson, who did not expect that this would result in his losing his strength, any more than violating the other Nazirite vows. When Israel breaks the covenant, we are used to God forgiving us. When God actually exiles us for breaking the covenant, we are shocked. We are shocked. And this is the paradigm of Samson. Do you see that? And just to make sure that you know this, Samson enters the temple. The young lad with him puts his hands on the pillars. Samson tells him exactly how to place them. There are 3,000 people on the roof alone, 3,000 Philistines on the roof alone. The temple is the home of Dagon, the deity of the Philistines, the chief deity of the Philistines. They're all there to make fun of Samson and by extension make fun of Samson's divinity, Samson's God, the God of Israel. They're mocking God and they're mocking Samson. And Samson says, I'm in verse 28, "Oh Lord God, please remember me and give me strength just this once." His strength has not come back because his hair grew back. He's weak. He is now turning to the person he knows is the source of his strength and saying to God, please remember me and give me strength just this once. He had a lot of time to sit in his corner and think about what he did wrong, right? He was exiled the same way Israel is going to be exiled in 586. He had a lot of time to think about why he was exiled. He embraced the two middle pillars and leans against them. He's not pulling them, he's pushing them. And then he pulls with all his might, and the temple came crashing down. Those who were slain by him as he died outnumbered those who had been slain by him as he lived. What a statement. If God is seeking a pretext against the Philistines, God could not have manipulated it any better to have Samson in that position. God's vessel in the temple of Dagon, and God pours God's spirit into this vessel one last time because Samson admits that God is the source of his strength, prays to God, acknowledges God, and asks for this as a boon. Do you see what I'm saying? The thing that Samson should have done, instead of saying, my strength is in my hair, and then covering that with with the real truth, which is I am a Nazarite, dedicated to God, blah, blah, blah. You're going to tell her the truth. You tell her it's a chance for you to exalt the God of Israel. You tell her that. And then we'll see. What's she going to do? Cut God off? No, you told her your hair. I'll cut that off and see if your strength gets cut off or not. God is giving Samson a really expensive lesson in expressing faith in God publicly, in understanding the necessity to say, bear witness. We've talked about this last week in Parshat HaShavua, bear witness. I am a witness to the God of Israel, to the one God of Israel. The one God of Israel is the source of my strength. And only when Samson does that, does Samson's strength return to him. And he kills more in death than he ever did in life, which is the answer to his prayer. His prayer is, let me take vengeance for one of my two eyes. He doesn't care to live. He's not asking to survive this. He's not asking to be made whole. He's asking for vengeance. And because it suits God's plan, God grants it. The reason for Samson losing his strength is not expressing his faith in God and that God is the source of his strength. And the reason for Samson getting his strength back is not that his hair is growing back, but that he finally acknowledges the source of his strength. This is true of Israel as well. This is why Israel is, in a sense, Samson is a paradigm of Israel, an archetype of Israel, because when Israel is in distress, when Israel is in constraint, that's when Israel turns to God and says, you are the source of my salvation. When Israel is prosperous and powerful, very often the acknowledgement of God is omitted or distorted. I'm just talking biblically here. Okay, so the source of his strength is not because of the Nazirite vow. The source of his weakness is not because he violated the Nazirite vow. It has to do with God and his relationship to God. So you all understand what I wanted to teach is vows are common in Israel. Vows are provided for more than 100 times. Fulfill your vow, bring your vow. Almost always it's a sacrifice in a holy place, an animal. What God really doesn't want, and we're going to look at this more closely next time, is a rash vow, a vow made under pressure of anxiety, of lack of faith, of terror. Don't make vows like that. Make vows where you can be careful of the language. Samson is unusual in the paradigm of the Nazirite because it's not voluntary with him and it's not time limited with him the way it is in Bamidbar in the book of Numbers, chapter 6. In Samson's case, the Nazirite vow is lifelong. It was decided for him by his parents, and he violates it repeatedly, and God stays with him. He only loses his strength when he doesn't acknowledge God, and not because he violates the vow. And that is the lesson to Israel. We too violate the covenant all the time. We're human. And if we acknowledge God is the center, according to the theology of the Bible, God will forgive us. God will come back, right? What is it? Unto the thousandth generation, which we read a week or two ago. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to teach today. I wanted to introduce you to vows and introduce you to the Nazirite vow. And next week, we're going to be talking about an actual rash vow in the book of Judges. So now I will take questions. Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, not only was it not Samson that undertook the vow, his mother didn't either. She was instructed that he was going to be a Nazirite.
Because it's the mother's job to instruct him. She had to teach him. During her pregnancy, she couldn't eat any of those things. She had to adhere.
But she wasn't the one that voluntarily said, I will make him a Nazirite.
No, she did not. She had a visitation from
Right.
angel.
Someone else said, hey, so it was imposed on her as well.
It was. And that is often the case. It's always the case with Israel, isn't it? We are born into it. Some of us choose it. Some of us do not. Okay, thank you, Charles. Other questions? Phil?
No. I just have
Phil?
Yeah, I have a technical question.
Speak into the computer. My computer stinks.
I have a technical question about vows, especially the vow to avoid drinking wine. Did wine have a different significance and importance in ancient times in that people could not just drink plain water out of a stream? They had to purify it with wine. So when we say drinking wine, it was really just drinking purified water. Was it really practical?
So Phil, you have read something that's half right and half not right.
Okay.
The water was not purified by the wine. What it was diluted grape juice. It wasn't actually wine. It was tirosh, which is diluted grape juice. And they did that because they didn't like the flavor of the water, which very often came from limestone sources, not because it was purified or needed to be purified or any of that stuff.
Okay.
And wine does have a significance in the ancient world. You look at Psalm 104, wine that makes the face to shine, that gladdens the heart. The Nazirite, the idea is that because wine kind of loosens your behavior, you might violate your Nazirite vow if you had any encounter with strong drink. And so for the period of your Nazirite vow, you couldn't. But I think it was also meant as a deterrent because because wine and strong drink was so much a part of the culture that not to participate in it was a big choice, to discourage people from doing it. There's no question that the Nazirite restrictions some of them are difficult, and you can't even mourn for your parents if your parents die. So they really want you not to undertake the Nazirite restrictions. They don't want you to do it, and if you do it, it's going to be tough. So it's not about purifying the water. You're right that wine has a role, but that's the point. That is exactly the point. Other questions? Arthur? And then Miriam.
I just want to reiterate in the original text verse from Reverend Gary Davis that as transliterated by Peter, Paul, and Mary in the Grateful Dead, that the Reverend wrote that Samson said, "You can shave my head clean as my hand, and my strength will become as natural as any old man." So it could have been a case of mind over matter, that he himself thought it was in his hair. And if he thought that it was in his hair and his hair grew back, maybe it was mind over matter. And that's where he got the strength to tear the temple down.
You'll pardon me for saying that when it comes to the Spirit of God, mind over matter doesn't operate. Number two, Peter, Paul, and Mary are wonderful midrashists, but I'm dealing with the text of the Bible. And the text of the Bible clearly says that even after she cut his hair, and he knew she would because she did everything else that he said not to do. Right? She tied him up, she wove his head in a web. He knew she was going to cut his hair, and he woke up expecting to have his strength back. And that's the biggest testimony that he really didn't expect that cutting his hair would cut off his strength. He really understood that it was not the source of his strength, and he was coding it in the truth that he was a Nazirite, but he didn't praise God when he could have. Okay, so pardon me for putting you back to the Hebrew text and away from Peter, Paul, and Mary, but that's just the topic of this course. Okay, Miriam, you were next. Miriam, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm trying to get back to the headline for this. Rash, vows, and dire consequences. What was rash about the vow that he never himself undertook? We can see what the consequences are, but what was rash about it?
The
Since
vow
Daniel
wasn't
was also
rash.
under the same Nazarite strictures.
First of all, I needed to find 3 stories in the book of Judges that had vows in them. That was number 1, because the course was 3 sessions. Number 2, I wanted a way to introduce everybody to the idea of vowing in the Bible and to what a Nazir was. And it was a way to talk about the Samson story in a way that maybe you hadn't thought about. So the answer is the dire consequences are next week. The rash vow part is.
I'm losing you. I don't hear anything you say.
I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. Is everyone hearing me or not?
You broke up a little, Diane.
Okay, I will repeat it. Because of the construction of the course in 3 sessions and the fact that I wanted it to be Judges, it gave me a chance to introduce the Nazarite idea to you, Ed Greenstein's idea to you, the theology of Samson to you, and it was a vow. So that's why I put it in. Okay, the dire consequences are he dies. The dire consequences next week are the result of a rash vow. Different kind of vow, that's the rash vow. And there's a rash vow, 2 rash vows the week after. That's 3 rash vows.
Okay, but not today.
Today was dire consequences, okay?
Today was the dire consequence.
Okay, other questions? Okay, you all gave me 15 minutes more than I deserved. I am so grateful for your time. If you have questions, email me. I'm happy to answer them if I can. If I think they're generally interesting, I'll answer them next week. Okay, so next week is Yiftach, Jephthah, that's Judges 11. Okay? Thank you, everybody.
Yasha Kokech.
Yashar kochech. Everyone.
Very nice.
Jessica, Diane, I'm gonna end the meeting now, and then I'll make sure to send the recording off when it's ready. All right?
Okay, everybody, thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everyone.
I'm hanging up, Mason. Is that okay?
Yep.
Thank
Bye.
you.
See you next week.